Hello all. In this video, we're going to start looking more closely at functions, and in particular, we're going to learn about how to create our own functions in Python. So not just using existing functions, but actually writing our own. In this first video, we're going to focus on vocabulary. There's a lot of terminology that goes around functions and function calls and function definitions. And then we'll look at the basic form of function calls and we'll look at the basic form of function definitions. Then we'll go on in another video to take a closer look with some examples. All right, so here I have a sort of a vocabulary list. This is selected terms that I think relate one way or another to functions and function calls. So an algorithm, we've talked about this before, it's a sequence of steps that describe how to solve some problem. Many times we conceive of algorithms as functions. They are things that take inputs and they produce results of some kind. So one way to imagine your program is that it's a series of algorithms, a series of functions that may interact with each other. An argument is an important piece of terminology having to do with function calls. It's the term we use to describe the data that we pass into a function when we call it. It's the data for it to operate on, the things that we want it to work with. A control structure is a big broad term. It refers to compound statements that change the general top to bottom step-by-step ordering of operations. We have seen other control structures. In particular, we've seen for loops and we've seen conditional statements, if statements. A function definition is also a control structure, and we'll talk more about that as we learn more about them. A function, conceptually, is a named piece of code that performs certain steps given some data as input and sometimes returns a value. Sometimes it causes a different kind of change, like a print statement doesn't really return a value, but when we call the print function, it does something, it displays information. So this is a very generic high-level view. What we are going to look at more is then how does this actually look in Python? How do we actually call functions? We've been doing it all along. Let's just look at it again more systematically and then look at how we can define our own functions as a way of organizing our programs. There are two pieces of terminology that I've put as underneath the term function: calling and invoking. These are both terms that we use for making a call to a function, for causing a function to do what it's defined to do. Calling the function is the most common, but you'll also see it described as invoking a function. They mean pretty much the same thing. Now you see below that we have two additional terms that relate to functions directly: function call and function definition. These are the two different parts of how we use functions. Function calls we've already seen. So a function call is when we call a function, and we'll see some examples later, but like calling the max function and passing it some numbers. We pass those numbers as inputs. It computes which one is the largest, and it tells us, it returns to us that largest value. So the function call causes the function to do what it's defined to do. A function definition is the other piece. If you have a function, somewhere that function's behavior is defined, and we call that the function definition. In the definition, we have to describe how one goes about calling a function, and we also have to give the steps that are supposed to be performed when the function is called. But it is separate. A function call and a function definition are two separate things, and one is not the other. Just writing out a definition does not cause the function to actually run. Input parameter variable. This is a very specialized term. It relates to the term argument up above. So an input parameter variable is the variable we use inside a function definition as a placeholder for an argument, as a placeholder for the data that will be passed in when the function is called. It's part of how we define the function, is exactly what inputs, how many, in what order do we actually have to have them, And the input parameter variable is sort of the full name that we could assign to what those variables are. It's a special name because they're a special kind of variable. They have a very particular role in things. Now, I'll notice that we do often shorten this. Sometimes we call it the input variable or the parameter variable. Sometimes we might just call it the parameter. We want to try to be as avoid being too inconsistent so that we confuse arguments with parameter variables, but that we do kind of use the terminology somewhat interchangeably at times when we're not being careful. All right, I'm going to scroll this up so we can look at the last of these terms. A local variable. It's a special kind of variable. We haven't had them yet because you only get them when you start doing function definitions. The local variable is one that exists inside a function. It only exists inside the function, and it only really exists actively while a function call is taking place. The local variables are created during the call to the function, and they are erased when the function call is over. They're local because they aren't visible to anything outside of the function itself, and they don't overwrite. They can be the same variable as a global variable, and they don't overwrite the global variable. Input parameter variables are one kind of local variable, but there are others. A method is a special kind of a function that's attached to an object. We haven't seen too many examples of this yet, but we will see a lot of them. You can think of it as just a function that's attached to an object for now, and we'll learn more about them later on. Parameter, I said before, this is just a short name for the input variables. Sometimes we'll actually use the word parameter for arguments as well, the data itself in a function call. It's one of those things that we do because we are somewhat sloppy human speakers. Variables, again, that's just the general term, right? Variables are important. We use them in our global scripts to store values. We use them with functions, both to store values, but also to manage the communication between a function and its function and the function call.